Daf Yud Aleph Amud Beis will begin Daf Yud Aleph Amud Aleph, 3 lines from the bottom. We learned previously that Rabbi Yehuda says we do not do the Bedikas Chometz after the Zman Isser because we're afraid that he might come to eat it. Why was he not Geyser in a similar case by Chodesh with the Isser of Chodesh? So he said that the principle was that something which a person is not accustomed to restraining himself and refraining from, for instance, chometz, the whole year he eats bread. It's not also the whole year, it's mutter. So there we're more concerned that he might impulsively come in and eat it. However, something where a person is accustomed to keeping away from it, he's accustomed to having it also and restraining himself, then we are not concerned. You mean to say is that so that a person, something where a person is accustomed to restraining himself from, he's not geyser. We learned in a brayso before it had high blood pressure, and the person, therefore, the owner would want to do bloodletting to puncture somewhere in the animal to release some of the blood and relieve the blood pressure. However, it's a bechor, and by a bechor, there's an isser to make a mum in a bechor. So the Brisa says that a bechor shachos dam afilu hu meis ein makizon leidam. Rabbi Yehuda says we are not allowed to do the hakazos dam, the bloodletting, because we're afraid that even if you allow him to do it in a place where it doesn't make a mum, he might come in to make it in a place where it does make a mum. And therefore he says, even if the animal's going to die, even before it's going to die, we do not allow you to do a hakazos dam. Chacham say it's mutter, Chacham say it's mutter, but you have to be careful not to make a mum in the animal, not to make a permanent blemish, a mum kavua. So you see over here that even though the isser of being matal a mum is something that bedilmine, that a person is accustomed to being careful and not doing, nevertheless, Rabbi Yehuda still says that we're concerned if you allow him to make the puncture, to do the bloodletting in a place, even a place where it doesn't make a mum, he might make it in a place where it does make a mum. You see that even though it's badal minei, he is geyser. The more answers, yes, over there in the case of the bechor, he is geyser because that's for a different reason. There's another concern over there. Since a person, he's facing a monetary loss. If he doesn't do the bloodletting quickly and effectively, the animal might die. So therefore, since he's bol alma mina, he's in an agitated state, in a confused state because of his potential loss of money. We say that since he is in such a state of turmoil, that perhaps if you allow him to do in a place where it doesn't make a mum, he might come to do in a place where there is a mum. So therefore, that's the way it's going. But Rabbanan Kolshkein Diloy Shores Le Klal also Lemevet. Now Rabbanan say they agree to that concern. They agree to the principle of Adam Balam Minor, but they say for that very reason we do allow him to do the bloodletting. Because if you don't allow him to do it at all, then certainly he might come to make a mum in a place where it would be a mum kavua. And therefore, we have to allow some relief over here in order to the person that he shouldn't face this loss and come to make a mum kavu in the animal. So they both agree to the principle on bolam minor. The question is, how should there be geyser or should there be geyser in this case or not? However, where it's not a question of on bolam minor, we are still maintaining, the Rav Yehuda says, that if he's badal minei, he's accustomed to restraining himself from this, eating this or doing this, then we are not geyser. If it's like badal minei, then, like by chometz, then we are geyser. The Gemara asks, in fact, do we say according to Rav Yehuda that adam bolam amayna, that a person that he is in turmoil over monetary loss, and therefore we have to be geyser? We learned in a Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda, he said you can't comb an animal on Yontiv because it makes a chabura. They used to comb the animal to remove dirt or mud, things of that nature, which cause pain to the animal. And that's something they used to do, and that was to preserve the animal. And it's a question of monetary gain or monetary loss. And Rabbi Yehuda says, "Ein mekadem behem b'yatzav, mipnei she'oiseh chabura." To use a metal comb is also because it'll scratch the animal and it'll draw blood, and it makes a chabura, which is also aval mekatzefim. But you could comb it with a wooden comb. Over there, it doesn't make a chabura. V'chachamim moimrim, chacham say ein mekadem af ein mekatzefim. But the chacham are geyser, and they say that, well, essentially a wooden comb should be mutter, but we're geyser. It also lachlufe. If you allow them with a wooden comb, they might use a metal comb. V'tanya iseu kidor v'iseu kirtzuv. What's the difference between the two? Kidor is katana v'iseu chabura. The kidor has thin teeth, and when you comb it, it scratches it, and it makes a chabur. Kirtzuv gedolim v'einoiseu chabura. But by the kirtzuv, the wooden comb, the teeth are thicker, and they're not so sharp, and it doesn't make a chabur. Now you see, even though over here we're dealing with a case of monetary considerations, the chachamim are geyser asilach lufe. You might, if we allow you with kirtzuf, you might come to do kiddush, and Rabbi Yehuda is not geyser. So don't we see that even though it's a question of monetary loss, we don't say adam bolam amayna, and therefore we have to be geyser? More answers, halsam the isha v'kla mais. Over there, it's different, because over there, in the case of the Bechor, over there we say Adam Bo'olam Amayna, because if you don't do something, if you don't now puncture it, and you don't relieve the blood, Adam Bo'olam Amayna, and therefore he will die. If you don't do something, the animal will die. Therefore, over there we say Amrin and Adam Bo'olam Amayna. Dafka over there we say Adam Bo'olam Amayna, because it's really, we're dealing with a financial loss. The animal will die, and so therefore he's in such turmoil to do the bloodletting to relieve the blood pressure. We're concerned over there, according to Rabbi Yehuda, that he might make a permanent blemish. But hacha, it's not the same consideration. The consequences aren't that severe. Ishavekletz are balmu. Over here, if you don't comb the animal, it's not going to die. It's just going to be in pain. So lo yamrinan adam b'olam amayna. Over here, we don't say adam b'olam amayna. So therefore, yes, Rabbi Yehuda says adam b'olam amayna, and therefore we are geyser even in places that normally we wouldn't be geyser. Even in a place where bodel minay, we say adam b'olam amayna. However, that's only when it's a genuine b'olam. When he's facing a financial loss, the animal will die. But just the discomfort of the animal, that principle does not apply in this case. The Malay Roim points out that we can't answer over here like we did in the previous case by the nair and the eggshell, that because of the chumrah of Shabbos, b'dilamine, that the person will be careful, and therefore there's no reason to be geyser. Because over here we're talking about Yontif. This case over here is talking about Yontif. And even though Yontif is also, of course, but it doesn't have the same chumrah as Shabbos. So this principle that we say Shabbos, the chumrah of Shabbos, that a person is bodel minei, applies strictly by Shabbos, but it would not apply to Yontif. So therefore, the Gemara has a kasha. Frag the Gemara, Rav Yehuda, Maishno Gabi Chavens the Gazer, or Maishno Gabi Kirsif the Loy Gazer. Why do we say, according to Rav Yehuda, that by Chametz he's geyser, and therefore you don't do the B'dik after Shas Yisr, and by Kirsif he's not geyser? Why do we say we should be geyser by Kidor as well, by Kirsif as well, rather? The Rabbi Kiva Eger asks a kasha that the Gemara's kasha is difficult because, of course, there's the obvious difference between the two. Chometz lachar shas yisur is a deraisa. The case over here of kiddur, over here is an isur derabbanan. Over here it's an isur derabbanan because it's a davar shein miskaven and it's not a psik reisha. And even though Rabbi Yehuda holds davar shein miskaven is also, but he holds the Gabi Shabbos, it's also Durabanan, not Deraisa. So there's the obvious difference over here. By Chametz, it's a Deraisa, he's geyser, but not by Kirtzuf, which is a Durabanan. He points out, Rabbi Kiva, that the Tais Shonim Yuma asks Akash as well. Tais Shonim and Yuma answers that Ein Chanami the Gemara could have, but it gives a better teretz. What's the Gemara's teretz? Lechem b'lechem nechlef. Bread bread on Pesach, B'Shas, Isser, and bread the rest of the year, that's easily interchangeable. People think bread was mutter before, and they'll forget, and after Shema Zmani Isser, that the same bread becomes also, so that's easily confused. Bread was mutter before, and the same bread is now also. But Kiddur b'Kirsuf loy mechala. But the activities of Kiddur and Kirsuf are different activities. They're with different types of combs. There, we're not concerned that it will be interchanged. Zok the Mishnah, Rabbi Meir Aimer, Oichlin Kol Chomesh, can eat the Chomesh the entire 5th hour. V'sarfim b'tchil sheish. And you burn it at the beginning of the 6th hour. Min HaTorah, the Chometz is only also after the end of the 6th hour. So the question is of the halachakas that we make. Rameir says the halakha is, it's enough to make a halakha that you have to burn it at the beginning of the 6th hour, but you can continue eating it till the end of the 5th hour. Rabbi Yehuda says, Oichlin Kol Arba, he says, no, you can only eat it the 4th hour. V'tolin Kol Chomesh. The 5th hour is left hanging, so to speak, which means that over here, you cannot eat it. But you don't have to burn it. It's mutar ba'ano. You can give it to your animals and feed it to your animals. So we don't answer it to that extent ba'ano. We answer ba'achila. But the gzeira on achila, he's more machmir, and he says it's only that oichlin kol arba. He said at the time of the Beis Hamikdash, they took 2 chalas from a korban toida that were also korban toida. You bring 40 chalas. They took 2 chalas from the korban toida that were apostle, and what they did was menochas al gabi itzvah. They put it on top of benches on the harabayas. Kol zman shemenochas. So they did it as a siman, as a sign for the people to know, to be aware when chametz becomes awesome. Kol zman shemenochas, as long as that they were on the benches, kol hamoichlin, people would see it be a sign, it would be a siman, and they knew that they can still eat the chametz. Nitla achas tailah. When one of the chalas were removed away, then they knew that they could not eat the chametz anymore. So that was a siman that now Erev Pesach is already the shas ha'isser midrabanan. They can't eat it anymore, and they would be tailah, and therefore it would be one of them was removed. They would not eat it, but it would be tailah loy oichlem loy sarfim. They couldn't eat it, but they didn't have to burn it. They could feed it to their animals. Nitlu shteihem. When both of them were removed, then he's chilul kolam sarfim. Then that was a sign that it was a time for bir chometz, and they had to burn the chometz. Rabbi Gamliel says chulin necholin kol arba. He makes a further distinction. He said that chulin you can eat it the entire 4th hour, but not beyond. Utruma kol chometz. But if it's truma, so we don't want to destroy the truma. And so we're not goizer as much by truma because we don't want it to be burned. It's kodesh. So truma kol chomesh, it can be eaten the entire 5th hour. V'sarfim mitchil sheish, but everything is burned at the beginning of the 6th hour. So we have our chakas in the entire Mishnah. People can make a mistake between the 7th hour and the 6th hour, etc., and therefore. Because of the fact that people can make a mistake and it's not so easy to determine the precise time, we have these harchakas, and the question is, to what extent are we geyser? Tanan Hassam, like the Gemara Tanan Hassam, we learned regarding the case of Eidos. We learned in Sanhedrin, the Gabi, the case of Eidos Echadam Rabbi Shnai Mechayesh. One says that the offense occurred on the 2nd day of the month. So one says that this Ritzicha took place on the 2nd day of the month. And one says, for instance, that it says on the 3rd, this event occurred on the 3rd day of the month. Eidus and Kayamas. We don't say that the Eidim, we don't say that the witnesses are contradicting each other, and we don't say it's possible Eidus. We say that, no, it's kosher Eidus. We can still rely on the Eidus, that even though the Eidim have to be examined and cross-examined to see that they're not lying or not contradicting each other, but this is not considered to be a contradiction. Why is that? It's Eidus and Kayem because because we say, well, it's at the beginning of the month, and Bezdin sometimes would make the previous month mole, 30 days, or sometimes they would make it chaser, 29 days. Now this was talking at the time before the calendar was fixed, so every month would vary depending on when the Eidim came and testified in front of Bezdin that they saw the new moon. Based on that, the Eidim and other factors, based on that, the Bezdin would determine when the new month came. Now, if one says the second of the month, so he knew that, we can assume that he knew that the previous month was Mol, it was 30 days, and now it's the second day of the new month. The other aide didn't know that, so he assumed the previous month was 29 days. So for him, the first day of the new month started a day earlier. That's why he says it's the third day of the month. But really, they're talking about the same event at the same time, and therefore, it's not a contradiction. But once it occurred on the third day of the month, there we say it is a contradiction. Now the next case is, and this is what's negaya to our Mishnah, is if one says that the event occurred on the second hour of the day, and the other person said it occurred on the third hour of the day. So again, edusa and kayenas. We don't assume it's a contradiction. We say that their testimony is accepted. Why is that? Because we say that, well, a person makes a mistake. That's a person doesn't know exactly when the time is. They didn't have watches and clocks in those days, and it was based determining on the position of the sun in the sky. So one person made a slight error one way or the other. We still say that's within the margin of error that's acceptable, and we don't consider it to be a contradiction. But one said it occurred in the third hour, another one says in the fifth hour, then we say the eight is a bottle. That's a contradiction, divrei Rab Meir. So he said between the third and the fifth hour, that's a contradiction. It's bottle. Rabbi Yehuda says no, it's not. We uphold the testimony. We can still say it's within the acceptable, reasonable margin of error. One says it occurred in the fifth hour, another one says, however, in the seventh hour. Now, it's still a 2-hour discrepancy. We said before the third or fifth, it's a 2-hour discrepancy and it's accepted. But over here, we're saying if it's in the fifth and the seventh hour, it's also only a 2-hour discrepancy, but it's not accepted. Edusin betela. Why is that? Because this is clear, it should be clear if something occurred before noon or after noon. In the fifth hour, the sun is in the east, on the eastern horizon. And in the seventh, it's on the west. In noon is the sun is in the middle of the sky. And prior to the fifth hour, it's on one side, it's on the east. On the seventh hour, it's on the west. So it's clear that they're contradicting each other, because it would be clear, is the sun to the east or is it to the west? So this is a clear contradiction. Amar Abai, if you analyze Rab Meir, you'll say, conclude, Rab Meir says a person does not make mistake in the time. You know, they determine the time by the position of the sun. People don't make mistake. And according to Rabbi Yehuda, a person makes a mistake by half an hour. Meaning, even though Rab Meir said, one said in the first hour, and the second hour, and one said in the third hour, then they do some kayemas. But in the third hour and the fifth hour, it's not kayemas. So you might think that even though one said in the second hour and one in the third hour, there's a big discrepancy between the two, we still accept it. The way he explains it, Abai says, no. They're talking about the same time. They're not making, the people don't make a mistake. And when the one who said that it's in the second hour, and when this one said the third hour, they're really talking about the same time. How is that? So now the Gemara explains. Rabbi explains. The incident occurred. It occurred at the end of when the second hour is ending and the third hour began. So they're really talking about the same time. The one that said the second hour, he's talking because it's the end of the second hour. It's at the time when the second hour is completed. The third is beginning. He calls it the second hour. The one that said the third hour, he's talking about the very beginning of the third hour, but they're talking about the same period of time. So there's no discrepancy, and people don't make a mistake. The Pnei Yeshua explains, well, it doesn't mean that people never make mistakes. What it means to say is that if they were not certain, if they Adam, their witnesses, if they were not completely certain of what the time was, they would have said, we're not sure. The fact that they claim this is the time, therefore we maintain that they are talking about the same time, and one is referring it to the second hour, and the other refers to it as the third hour. The Gemara shortly will, on the next element, will question this. How can we make that assumption and therefore kill a person? You can't make such an assumption. But at this point, this is what we're learning, that according to Reb Meir, the witnesses are not making a mistake. They're talking about the same time, and one is calling it the second, and one is calling it the third. But if it be the third and the fifth, they're not referring to the same time, and there is a discrepancy, and therefore the edus is not accepted. So that's in Reb Meir. According to Rabbi Yehuda, there would be a acceptable margin of error. People make a mistake with a half hour. And so therefore, however, don't think that the third and the fifth means that they make a mistake with that large of a gap. Again, what we mean is, in Masechet Pesachim, the Masechet took place at the midpoint of the fourth hour. The one who said the third hour means the end of the third hour. So therefore, it's a half hour away from when the actual incident took place, which is a half hour later. And he made a mistake, and he called it a half hour early. The one that said 5, he was referring to the beginning of the fifth hour, and he made a mistake, he called it a half hour later. So it occurred at 4.5, and he called it 5. So that's where the acceptable margin of error would be, within a half hour, and the Maisa took place at 4.5, and each one is referring to, they called it, when he called it the third hour, he meant the end of the third hour. When he said the fifth hour, he meant the beginning of the fifth hour.